I Want to Jump Like Dee Dee, with me, Giles Sibbald, is the music podcast that does music a bit differently. I'm talking to some incredible musicians, DJs and producers about how they use an experimental mindset to fuel their own creativity, pursue new challenges, overcome fears, bounce back from mistakes. I usually give my own spiel to introduce my wonderful guests, but I'm going to hold my hands up today because my guest's own spiel has hands down beaten anything that I could ever muster. She described herself thus: think Regina Spektor meets Billy Bragg, but with fewer digits and a continuous existential crisis sandwiched between bitter irony and relentless optimism. Brilliant. Now, the roller coaster of emotions that I get from listening to her music is about as addictive as it gets. The melodies, harmonies, these sort of wonderful chord progressions, which make me kind of lurch from, sort of heartbreak to irony to optimism, or kind of back again, and then sort of round the Big Dipper and all the other stuff that you get. And one thing that sort of made me think, I thought of Scapegoat, by the song by Chumbawamba. And at the very end of that, there's a sample of a speech that Pete Postlethwaite gives in Brassed Off. And he goes, "Oh, aye, they can knock out a bloody good tune." And that part of it, for me, that film, in fact, sort of sums up my guest music. Invincible tunes with a message that really matters. So with that, I'm going to shut up and I'm going to welcome Carol Hodge to the show. And I'm really proud that Carol's on it. So Carol, welcome. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you. And can I just add as a caveat,
Yeah.
I'm not a brass band.
You're not a brass band, absolutely not a brass band.
Just in case anyone's a bit confused by the Brassed Off reference, I am not a brass band.
You're definitely not a brass band. So what's been what's kind of been going on with you? You're, if I'm not mistaken, you're sort of starting to record your next record. Is that?
Yeah,
right
I've done.
Yeah.
Last week I spent 4 days in the studio.
Yeah.
So I was working with Dave Draper, who's
Yeah.
produced my last 3 albums.
Yeah.
And we made really good headway. So we got kind of 7 tracks, kind of almost there.
Yeah.
I've actually ended up with quite a few guest artists on this new album. So some of those tracks are ready to be, they've already been sent to the guest artists to add their bit.
Yeah.
And what I've done differently this time, and this is kind of like album recording 101, but I've always done it backwards, is I actually just recorded a guide vocal. And now that I have the produced tracks, the last thing that's going to go on it is my final vocal.
Right.
Which makes sense, but just historically hasn't happened. I've always gone to the studio with a finished vocal and a finished piano part and any finished synth parts that I've written as well.
Right.
And then we've sort of produced the rest of the track from there.
Yeah. And are you kind of now able to sort of record it differently? Are you kind of like going into the studio, sort of full time? Are you doing things like practical things a bit different aside from the, what you just mentioned about the vocals?
Well, I mean, I invested in a good condenser mic. I'm pretty au fait with Logic, the recording program.
Yeah.
So, I do a lot of, I do all my demoing from home and then, send that to Dave and he has a listen. And then in the actual studio, I'll often have written a guitar part, but on MIDI.
Yeah, right.
I'll be like, listen to that. Can you do something like that? And sometimes, I'll just hear like, a solo needs to be like this, or a brass part needs to be like this.
Yeah.
But I'm usually, this time in particular, I'll hear melodies in my head and I'll record them, but I'll be quite open as to what instrument is going to play them. Because this time around I had quite a few tracks where I'd written what I thought were going to be string parts, but I really don't like MIDI strings. When they sound like MIDI strings, they sound like something from like 1998 and they just sound like really cheesy. I didn't want that. So we've kind of played around with those parts and we came up with some really cool, some of them were sort of mellotron-y sounds, some of them were more kind of ambient soundscapey.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of how I work. I've got a lot better over the years at recording my ideas like really quickly, getting a click on, getting everything at the right tempo, getting the initial idea down. Yeah. And then it's really easy to just build things from there.
Was that not happening before when you came across the idea? It was just you weren't doing stuff with it, and then the idea was sort of lost.
Not so much that I lost the idea, but just for a long time I had a weird hang up about if I like pressed record, or if I started to think about playing to a click or whatever, that any creativity would just vanish. And that I had to I had this misconception that I had to record the idea in its purest form, like the immediacy of when it comes out. That's where the magic is. But I don't believe that anymore. I believe that you get an inkling of an idea. I believe you get a little message, and then your job as a songwriter is to listen to that message and get it down. And then, once you get into the flow, it's all about understanding how to shape that initial little inkling of an idea. That's how it works for me, anyway.
Yeah, which is interesting. I mean, that's the interesting thing about it. It's the kind of the uniqueness of how you get your ideas out. How you get your inspiration, and then kind of what works for you about how you then turn those into your sort of music.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that process has become it's kind of a funny thing. In one way, it's become a lot more magical. Yeah. Which is what I always want it to be. But in another way, it's become a lot more nuts and bolts and technical and practical. But I've come to realise that, certainly in my case, that inspiration and creativity is like a tap that I can turn on and off. I used to always be fearful that, I might just never have any ideas. And I'm like, well, if I work every day and if I sit down at my piano every day and I get into a creative mental state, then chances are I'm going to come up with something. It might not go on an album, but it's part of the process of getting to the things that I do want to share with the world. But it's about it's about discipline, basically. That's one thing I've come to realise, is that it's all very well being all airy fairy and like, inspiration, and I've written 2 songs this year because I was inspired. It's like, well, if you had a good structure, and you had a good routine, you'd probably write 300 songs in that time. So it's interesting, but what kind of works for one person doesn't work for another. With sort of with that, I'd be kind of very much like you, having, I think, just sort of intuitive, having more kind of order, if that's the right word, or structure to sort of to your day. And maybe that's because what I've been used to for God knows how many years. And as much as I think sometimes I'd like to break out of that and have like something that's not as structured, I think I will probably struggle with it, because that structure is almost like who I've become. Do you know what I mean? It's a strange thing. But I think that kind of mode of being, and that inner discipline and inner high expectations, basically, you can then transfer that skill to whatever it is you're working on. It doesn't need to be a kind of like a capitalist worker sort of structure. It could be that you spend those 12 hours a day that you've kind of timetabled doing like amazing things that have nothing to do with earning a living doing something that's a bit boring. I'm not saying that that's what your experience is, but I think you're absolutely right. I think order is something that I've come to realise is very important to then, for me to, in the long run, be happy and to be productive, which is one of the things that makes me happy. So
it's funny, isn't it? I remember that, and I wonder if it's like, depends what sort of stage of your life you're at as well. I mean, I you just triggered something that I remember reading just the other day. It was an interview with Jez Kerr from A Certain Ratio, and he was saying that what you've just been describing, that's how he was for quite good part of writing for A Certain Ratio, but now he's much more kind of like, well, what's important is that I kind of like sit down and sort of have a cup of tea, and he just sort of he takes his time more, I guess, is the kind of thing. And I wonder if just as you go through life, your identity shifts, and you kind of like adapt yourself to how your mind and your body is working. I guess that's kind of logical, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm nearly 40, and I feel like I've only become an adult in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And that's largely due to being sober, like properly sober.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you're right. It's about finding your own rhythm. I know that sounds really cliched, but it is about recognizing. I keep thinking when I have moments when I'm like, well, I used to teach full time at a college, and do 4 gigs a week, get home at 4 a.m, and get up at 7:30 and go to work. And like now, if I do a gig, I'm just like, I need to take a day off. Like, I can't do anything.
Yes.
And it's like, I'm nearly 40. I'm not going to be, my body and my brain aren't going to be the same as they were in my mid-20s. And it's just something that I'm slowly having to accept. But I also think it's to do with cycles, and it's to do with the seasons. And as a woman, it's to do with my hormonal, my menstrual cycle. All those things have a massive impact on my day-to-day, like how I operate. So that awareness of it, and like you say, like a stage of life, it's the way you feel, and your capability one day might be totally different the next day. So I think it's a lot of the time is about accepting that and meeting yourself halfway. Because you're the person who has to experience whatever you're doing. So it's quite nice to be able to say, all right, well, you can have that cup of tea, Jez, and we can chill out, and we can maybe do a bit of yoga and walk the dog, and then we'll just do a couple of hours and see how it goes. Yeah,
just see if there is anything. Might be, it's fine. Yeah, we'll come back tomorrow.
That approach might be way more productive than like, right, it's 9 o'clock, come on, 8 hours of writing, go. Yeah. When you're just going to be sat there spinning your wheels and stressing. Yeah.
Well, actually, you've reminded me that there's I read this article a few years ago, and you might be aware of it, but it's like when I read it, I was just like, oh my God. So like anybody that's listening, be prepared to be sort of depressed. But it was basically this guy called Arthur Brooks, who's he's in the US, and he was like sort of president of a think tank institute, and he got to a sort of stage where he kind of realized, he was sat on the plane, and there was a US politician behind him talking about, and I think the politician was like in his sort of late 70s, talking about how he was just like, I can't do this anymore, that like my brain's sort of not working. Anyways, this caused him to sort of research the brain, the cognitive abilities of the brain. And it's basically from the age of, it's something like early 30s that your brain sort of starts to cognitively decline. I mean, you probably know that already. When I read this, I was just like mind blown. I was just like, oh my God, right, I've been on a decline here for about sort of 20 years. And now it's kind of explained it, that you can't function at whatever level you were operating at when you were sort of 25. I mean, again, it kind of makes sense, but you just don't think when it's about you, or you either choose not to ignore it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I found recently, and again, I just presumed that this was because of alcohol in the past, so like brain damage, whatever, by drinking too much. That now, really frequently, I have moments where I'm like, and it's that cliche of like you walk into a room and you can't remember when you were in there, but it's not so much that. It's almost like there's a whole block of like missing files. Yeah. Like there's a whole, like the filing cabinet drawer, when I pull it open in my head, it's just like a moth just flies out. And the thing I'm looking for is just no longer resident there. And it's really weird, but it's just like a blank.
It's a really good way of
it's
describing
happening more
that.
and more.
Yeah.
And I think it is just, I mean, there's the Homer Simpson thing of like every time you learn something new, it pushes something else out of your head.
Yeah.
Which feels very real as you age. So that's quite interesting that when you hit 30, I guess it depends, like, what was you, if 30 is your peak, how good were you at 30? What was your cognitive capability like?
What was your capability? And were you actually using it to the best of your abilities? But I guess it's like you sort of adapt and you use things in a or you have to use things in a different way. You know, you can't be, you know, if you're into kind of tech, you can't be sort of writing code and stuff like that when you're sort of 50. I mean, I couldn't write it when I was 20 anyway. I don't know if it existed when I was 20. Actually, it probably did. It probably didn't. I
remember in the days of MySpace being like getting some really basic code down, like, you know, when to change the colour of a frame or something like that. But that was about as far as I got. I just hit that wall. Like with maths as well at school, I was really good up until a point, and then it was just like it's changed and nothing makes sense anymore. So.
Oh my God! I remember a maths teacher at school, and he had these. So I know we're sort of digressing off any sort of relevant subject, but it was funny because he was such a big. I mean, and actually calculators did exist, but he was such a big believer in like using log tables and stuff like that, doing it all kind of like manually. That's about how you kind of demonstrated your capability and, you know, how you showed your brain. Wow. He was the one that actually sort of came up with that phrase, "sparsely furnished in the attic." Oh. Oh yeah, yeah. Oh, it's like talking about like sort of top humiliation.
Yeah, and isn't that funny though? Like, I mean, I sometimes think like, why did I have a real block around maths at school? Because I was really academically capable at school.
Yeah.
And I ended up I got a B in maths GCSE, which was like the worst grade I got. It was the one B I got.
Yeah.
Everything else was A's and A stars.
Yeah.
And sometimes I just can't figure it out. Why was it I had
maths?
such a block about maths? But obviously I was good enough at it to get a decent grade.
Yeah.
So I was obviously learning enough of what they were trying to teach me, but I just had a real hang up about it, which is strange because it's very much linked to music theory, and I love music theory, and I love getting really geeky about the maths and the patterns in it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Did you learn music when you were, you know, at any kind of stage in your life? You know, like the theory and the application and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, well, I taught myself to read music when I was 8. And then I started going to keyboard lessons and then piano lessons, like privately. And so I did all my up to grade 5 music theory with that teacher when I was basically through from about the age of 9 to about 14. And I did GCSE music and stuff at school, but really didn't really learn a lot in those classes, to be honest. But yeah, I know. I mean, I still do. I mean, I teach music now. I teach music theory, and I really get really excited about it when I'm teaching someone.
I did grade 5. I think I did grade 5. Yeah, I did. I think was grade 5 when you could stop when you'd done grade 5. I mean, I suppose you could stop anytime.
Yes, if ABRSM, you had to do grade 5 theory before you could continue further with the practical grades.
That's right. Yeah, so I did grade 5 theory because I played the cello when I was a kid, and I played it up to grade 8. I got it up. So yeah, it was that grade 5. I think that was the real. I struggled with the theory. It was weird. And like for somebody that sort of kind of likes those sort of the structure. I just struggled with the theory. I think I scraped through the grade 5, whereas the practical stuff was I won't say easier, but it was I didn't struggle with it as much.
Yeah, it's often the same with musicians though. It's often, I mean, a lot of the musicians I know they can't read music, but they're amazing, you know. Yeah. And they don't understand. I mean, I think now, as a songwriter and as somebody who plays in bands, music theory has been super helpful, if only for me to understand, okay, if we're playing in the key of A,
Yeah.
Or if the first chord of this song is A, chances are we're going to play D major, E major, F sharp minor, C sharp minor. And you kind of know where it's going. So it helps you in that situation of learning new material and improvising with people and just kind of understanding the structure of a song. You know that that's the intro, that's the verse, that's the chorus, that's the bridge. Having that kind of language and understanding allows you to communicate and collaborate a lot more effectively, I think.
Did you find, or have you sort of found yourself thinking, and I don't know if it's something that you know we consciously sort of observe in ourselves, but that theoretical framework or that and that training has kind of limited isn't the right word, but do you know what I mean? That you're aware of these sort of frameworks that within which music operates, and you think sometimes I wish I could kind of break out of that.
Yeah, but I think it's good, and I know what you mean. And again, looping back to the idea of it being magic, of it being like, oh, it's that, and then I'll feel around and it's that. Like, I still generally write like that. I get an idea in my head and I hear it and I pick out what note it is, and then I think, right, does it start on that chord or that chord? And then I feel my way through it when I'm writing. I don't think, okay, go into the dominant, now it's subdominant, now it's the minor stick. I don't really think like that. But that is useful information to have, because a lot of the time it's like, if you want to break the rules, it's good to know what the rules are. And also it depends on the sort of the deck of cards that you're playing. I've recently been learning jazz piano, and that's for me, it's been like really mind-blowing and really expanded my sort of palette, if you like.
Brilliant.
As to what's possible. But again, understanding basic music theory is really helpful with that, because it then helps me understand how those chords are structured and what notes are in the chord, and whether it's what a half diminished chord is, and how I can figure that out if I know what a major chord is. So it's kind of using the tools I already have as a starting point, and then building lots of weird stuff on top of it. That must be incredible. I don't know anything about jazz piano. I mean, my dad played the piano, so I know bits about the piano, but kind of jazz piano, I know very little about it. About the what it's about. Yeah, it's all, from what I can gather so far, it's all about patterns. Like the teacher I have is very, obviously he's a professor of music, so he knows his onions, but he's also an amazing player and composer, and he teaches in terms of patterns. It's like, in terms of how a chord is structured, it'll be like, okay, we'll have 3 semitones between your first and second notes, and then 5 semitones between your third and fifth notes, or whatever. And then he's just like, and just take that shape and move it around.
Yeah.
So it's kind of stuff that makes sense if you understand, pop music theory, but just uses the rules in a slightly different way.
Wow.
So there's enough there for me to cling on to, but it really hurts my head by the end of a session. But that's great. That's what I'm paying for. I'm just like, I don't want to be like, yeah, I know all this. I want to be like, can you just go over that again and give me another example? Because I just want to check I got that right. I'm just going to record you saying that again. But that's great. I think it's good to challenge your declining brain.
Absolutely. Sort of keep it like that sort of muscle, that brain muscle just sort of needs work, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's sort of challenging. So, go back to, when you were younger, I'm sort of thinking, about your formative influences, your, kind of people, your kind of environment that you lived in, your kind of like people that you hung out with, how your kind of mindset that, how that's sort of evolved from then through the years.
Yeah. In terms of sort of musical influence.
Anything that really kind of like has played a big part in kind of like who you are, either as you as a person, musician, those sort of things.
Yeah. Well, I always when I think about why I am the way I am, for better or worse, I often explain to people that. So basically, when I was 6, I moved from Scotland to Cumbria.
Yeah.
So moved from Scotland to England, and I lived in a really small town, Barrow-in-Furness.
Yeah.
Which is, beautiful scenery. It's a peninsula, so it's surrounded on 3 sides by water, and it's a very insular kind of place. It's like everybody knows each other, everyone's related to each other.
Yeah.
And if you weren't born there, then you were always perceived as an outsider.
Yeah.
And people say even now, like, I mean, my parents have lived there for like 30 odd years, and they would still think they'd still be perceived as interlopers, because they weren't born there. So I always feel like I had that. I've always been made to feel like an outsider because I wasn't from there. And then the second sort of cornerstone of my being is the fact that I have a physical disability. And until I was in my 20s, I never met anyone else with a hand difference.
Yeah.
And when I was growing up, I was never in contact with anybody with a disability.
Yeah.
And the people around me, adults and children alike, didn't understand and didn't have the language or the capability to deal with it properly and to be able to discuss it and to be able to just sort of help me feel like I was normal and feel like I was like everybody else.
Yeah.
So there was those 2 things, and then the third thing was the fact that I was very bright academically, and I always stood out because of that, because I always knew the right answers and I always finished everything really quickly.
Yeah.
And that made me different as well. So I always feel like those 3 things were very, very important in me forming my personality. And I'm pretty sure, I think probably from about the age of 8 or 9, I remember having feeling really seriously depressed as a child, which is kind of heartbreaking, when you think about it. And it wasn't anybody's fault; it was just circumstances, sort of leading to that. So that's always been how I felt as a person. Yeah. And then coming into adulthood, and then when I was in high school, I found a few other people who were a bit weird as well, and like the same sort of music as me, which is very important because I think I was the only person in my year who knew who Green Day were. Yeah. It was like we got Sky TV in 1994. And so we had MTV, and my brother was 4 years older than me, so he had it on all the time. So it was that amazing year where it was like Green Day, Offspring, Soundgarden, Hole, Radiohead, Beastie Boys, all these amazing bands were just exploding. Yeah. And I was listening to the music all the time, and it's like, this is awesome. And then I found there's a few other people at school who were like, oh, you know Soundgarden now, that's amazing. I was like, oh my God, be my friend. So it was kind of, that being into alternative music and finding other people who were, and lo and behold, those people were my people in more than just musical taste. Do
you think that was, I'm always interested, kind of like how, how we kind of gravitate to certain, kind of musical styles, if you maybe that's not the right word, but basically I kind of gravitate to a certain type of music, because when I grew up, it was my first love was the Ramones, and then I got into the sort of US hardcore, the Bad Brains and that sort of stuff. That was always my kind of thing, something that was, and I had this kind of playing the classical cello, but then on the other sort of side of the coin, this sort of kind of really loud punk rock that I used to really love as well. And I was always interested in what attracted me to that sort of style of music. And maybe, I don't know, maybe it was that sort of feeling of you find some kind of empathy with outsiders, or if you feel an outsider yourself, that, you found some sort of solace in that style of music. And then when you find other people that, were into it as well, that creates that kind of bond.
Yeah, and it wasn't ever. I mean, I guess, you know, if you didn't know much about, you know, grunge and that sort of pop punk, sort of like, what would it be, third wave, second wave, whatever wave it was. Like you'd think, oh, it's like angry teenage music.
Yeah,
It was like, but for me, it was never about the mum and dad don't understand me.
Yeah.
It was about the music and for me it was about like the chord changes and
Right.
how,
Yeah. Okay.
you know, like particularly Green Day were like my favourite band.
Yeah.
And then I got really into like No Doubt as well.
Yeah.
And it's about that, you know, really sort of poppy, melodic mentality, but then mixing it in with something that just felt really cool and really like mine. I had a real thing, like I was really disappointed. I remember when I was about 16 and it was Time of Your Life by Green Day. It got to number 1. And I remember being on the bus to school and it came on the radio. It was like a coach bus. And everybody started singing along and I just sat there and I wanted to cry because they were my band and I'd been into them for like, you know, 3 years before that and nobody had ever heard of them and people would be like, oh, that weird mosher music. And now that same band, my band, were at number 1 and everybody, all these people who didn't know anything about music were singing along.
It's like, no, it can't be. No.
Yeah, it's my band, stop it. But I think that's really important as well. I think that sort of tribalism.
Yeah.
Something I noticed when I was teaching in colleges, you know, going back maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, so not that long ago, is that like kids now, it's a lot less tribal and there was a lot of music sharing, obviously because you can and it's free now.
Yeah.
So within a class, you know, at the start of the class when everybody was arriving, somebody would be like, oh, have you heard this? And they'd be like, you know, some sort of Stormzy track or something. And somebody would be like, oh, yeah, that's really cool. Have you heard this? And it would be like, you know, something like really, really heavy, like black metal. And they'd just listen to each other's music and just really dig it. And they didn't care what genre it was.
Yeah.
I quite liked that. I thought that was a really nice exchange.
I mean, I wish I'd had that. It must have been when I was at school. I sort of had like there were a few of us that, you know, had the same sort of musical taste, and there was one fellow who was basically like kind of like my best friend there. You know, and he was, his sort of first love was like The Fall, but we also sort of had the, you know, very sort of common sort of love for, you know, kind of bands like Einsturz and Neubauten. You know, and I remember like being at a party and sort of we were trying to convince other people that this was what they needed to be listening to, and nobody was having anything of it. You know, trying to persuade them, you know, about the sort of the pneumatic drills, but nobody was having any of it. You know, it's like, come on, I'll take them forward, and they're sort of sharing black metal alongside Stormzy and stuff like that. It's like, why didn't I have that? You know.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think it's a good thing because I think, you know, the more music of any genre can enrich your experience of life, the better. Yeah. And I love the idea that, you know, particularly younger generation now, they're not turning their nose up at anything. They're not refusing to listen to something just because it's from that genre. Yeah. They're more open-minded about it, which is great. I mean, I kind of wish I'd been more like that at the time. Maybe I would have heard, like, you know, really exciting stuff that would have inspired me further.
It sort of feels a little bit like sort of genres are becoming a bit, you know, quite redundant because there's so much that you know, even, you know, within, you know, particular sort of artists where there's so many different influences that are coming into the types of music that they're producing. It feels like the sort of genres are there for, I don't know, some reason, whether it's in, you know, kind of record stores to help kind of categorize things. And also I think our brain likes to compartmentalize, doesn't it? You know, it helps to understand things because you put it in a certain, that's, you know, kind of psychedelic, that's folk, blah, blah, blah. And I don't know. It just feels like it's not quite as relevant now. Yeah, and it's, I mean, the very first band I was in, we started in 1997. And we thought, as you always do in the first band you're in,
when you're a teenager. We thought we were something really different.
Yeah.
And our whole thing was like, oh, don't label me, or don't put me in a box. Like we're not a certain genre.
Yeah.
And it's like basically we were like a pop punk band with a bit of ska.
Yeah.
But we thought we were really edgy. And I think there's a real thing now. And when I hear people saying that, it makes me cringe now. When bands are like, oh yeah, we're different, and it's like, you're not different. Like, but that's fine. You're brilliant, don't get me wrong, but you sound like 200 other bands I've heard in the past. And I think there is I've been listening. I made a point of, I was on a few end of year lists. My album popped up on a few, some that were quite well known, which I was very pleased about.
Yeah.
So I've made a point of finding every single album that was on a lot of these lists and listening to it. And yeah, I have found that, particularly a lot of sort of female singer-songwriters who were obviously within my sort of sphere of reference, I found it quite comforting because I realised that, that a lot of the stuff is less specifically a genre. It's like within an album, you can go from one extreme to another in terms of style. And that's becoming more acceptable. Yeah. Because I sometimes, and I still have insecurities about this, I sometimes wonder that because I'm a solo artist and I do like to experiment and I do like to play with different sounds and different genres, does that mean I'm just like throwing as much shit at the wall as I can and hoping some of it sticks? Or is it that, I have actually got a vision of sorts? Yeah. And I kind of worry about that. I think, sometimes, am I perceived to not have much credibility because I'm not, this is me and this is how I sound on every single song. Yeah. I'm just kind of like, well, hopefully you can still tell it's me. Yeah. But I like to play around with how, the rest of it's fleshed out.
I guess, I don't know, but that sounds like it's a kind of natural sort of evolution for you, and you those things, those sort of sounds that are interesting you. You said, okay, well, how can I sort of express those myself? I don't know if that sounds a bit wanky, but you know what I mean. Express those in the sort of music that I'm producing. It's like you mentioned being open-minded, and I think that's totally right. Totally right.
Yeah, and that's the thing about music that resonates with you. It's often not a really obvious thing that you like about it. There's just something, people say, I don't want to use the term X factor because it's been completely diluted and made into something else. Yeah. But there is something that you can't quite put your finger on. There's just something that you feel connects with you or resonates with you. And I think that thing is authenticity. Yeah. It's the artist giving you something that's real. They're not giving you something because they're trying to appeal to a certain audience or they're trying to tick a certain box. They're just being themselves and saying, oh, I feel this at the moment, here you go. Like in the hope that someone else feels that way and they don't feel as alone. I think that's a really good point. I think that sort of authenticity and people being able to kind of like relate to you, to kind of like either sort of emotionally what the music is sort of saying, but also kind of lyrics as well. I think there are certainly, it seems to be sort of more artists that are kind of self-aware. Yeah. That's what matters. That's how you kind of like you really kind of resonate with people. By giving them that thing to sort of like, okay, well, this is something that I can sort of relate to because this is happening in my life. Because if it's happening to you, it's likely to be happening to somebody else as well. They're going to be feeling the same. Yeah, absolutely. And I think we live in a very interesting time where it's there's so many different sides to an artist that what you get on the record might be very different to how they portray themselves on like social media, for example. Yeah. And I think more and more it's becoming about that. It's not just about hearing a song and feeling connected to it. It's like, well, what are they like as a person and finding out about that. And that can sort of make it or break it for some people. I've had that recently. I've had a couple of bands that I've been like, oh, I really like that song, and I've gone online, I've just been like, oh no, they're really full of them, really, really full of themselves, and I don't like it, and they're not self-aware. I really like people who are self-aware and who can do things with their tongue in their cheek and not take themselves super seriously 100% of the time, and not have a massive ego. Like for me, that's, I guess, almost as important as what they're producing. If I'm gonna really invest in it, you know.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned self-awareness. I mean, that sort of area is something I'm really interested in. That whole kind of like emotional intelligence, you know. And it's funny, like, you know, still kind of at schools. I mean, my sort of feeling is that you know, still you know, kind of like academical, you know, stuff that involves your kind of IQ, but you know, things like self-awareness, your empathy, you know, how to just basically kind of like sort of manage yourself is not really kind of taught. It's something that you sort of stumble through life, and, you know, hope that you learn from your experiences of who you're around, who you kind of grow up with, and that's gonna wear off. But I really think that those kind of things are just like so important for, you know, how we can, like, I don't know, like sort of individually, but also as a sort of society, how we can, you know, kind of get through some of the shit that we have to these days.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. It's not something that's taught at all.
No.
And it's, again, for me, it's something that I feel I've come to very late in life, much later than a lot of people. That I think for a very long time I was that classic kind of dichotomy of was really like painfully self-conscious, as opposed to being self-aware. Was just didn't know what to do with myself. I had a lot of like self-hatred and loathing, but that manifested itself in me being a show-off and being coming across as being very egotistical and very self-assured. When in actual fact inside it felt like the exact opposite. Whereas now I feel like I am much more genuinely self-aware, and I have the golden pause button where I can just press pause for a moment and just think before I speak, or
breathe,
think
and
before
just
I react, you know, or like, and for me, I'm still like really getting a kick out of, like, especially when when you're moving in certain circles with other musicians, you meet some people and everybody's always got stories, you know, of like what's happened to you on tour and stuff. And there's often people will talk about someone and I'll think, oh, I met them and this happened. But for me at the moment, it's just about not giving my story, not butting in and saying, oh yeah, well I met him and this happened. Like just like indulging the other person and letting them have their say in their moment. That's, for me now, that's more important than me feeling like, oh well, I've got to be equal here. I've got to be important. I need to let everybody know that I have met Jello Biafra and that this is what happened when I met him. Like, you know, it's like, really matter,
that being able to kind of see it from the other person, whatever the other person is saying, it's important to them. You just kind of like hold it back. I mean, was it like that going from that, how you describe yourself as sort of like egotistical to sort of how you know it? I mean, was there a sort of turning point that you can identify, or was this a kind of gradual thing that sort of happened to you?
I think it's certainly been a process. I remember getting to about 25, 26 and having a big shift around then, and sort of realising, just becoming a little bit, just like a bit of a consciousness shift where I just sort of moved everything out a little bit and I could see things a little bit more as an overview. I was like, oh, that's who I am, right? Okay. And then, to be honest, the biggest shifts have happened in the last couple of years since I've been sober,
since you gave
done
up
a
the booze.
proper recovery plan. So
and is that, I mean obviously that you know that's been a sort of big change, you know, sort of getting sober. But I mean, you know, from a kind of like mindset point of view, what do you feel that has given you, you know, in those sort of years as you've, you know, sort of quit?
I did. I mean, I was sober for 2.5 years in my early 30s, and that's when I was teaching full time at college.
Yeah.
And I found that it gave me a lot more mental capacity.
Yeah.
And I found that I was just more able to see. I mean, when you're teaching like a class of people, there's like dozens of like spinning plates. And I felt like I was more able to be like, oh, that's going to happen there. I need to do this. We need to do less of this. This needs to happen in 5 minutes. And I was much more able to facilitate all of that sort of thought process. But this time around, I've been sober for 3 years now, and I've done it properly, and I've taken proper inventory of my flaws, and got the help and the support that I really needed instead of just doing it all on my own and sort of white knuckling. And yeah, it's I think that's where the major shifts have happened. I've lost the thread of what you first said originally.
Not at all.
Because I'm almost 40 and my brain's going.
Well, it's yeah. I mean, I can't remember what I asked her anyway. No. No, it was like, you know, sort of since that time. I mean, I quit 2 years ago, and sort of like for me, it's a kind of similar sort of thing, you know, that, and I think that kind of clarity of mind and that almost like that, going back to that sort of emotional intelligence, that sort of self-motivation. You know, I'm not kind of like motivated by, you know, whatever kind of materiality and all that. Just doing things, you know, and when I'm doing them and like enjoying them, and feeling like I've got time to do them. It's just like almost like a bit of a kind of, I suppose, an inner calming. If that again doesn't sound too wanky, I've probably made a few of those in this sort of session.
No, it's great. No,
do you know what I mean?
I love that kind of thing. Yeah, and I think it's the thing that addiction does. Whatever you're addicted to, whether you're addicted to your phone or food or alcohol or drugs, the addiction tricks you into thinking that whatever you do in normal life is boring, and that it's not fun, it's not interesting, it's not good enough, it's a waste of time because you're not getting hammered. Yeah. And I realised that quite early on in recovery, and I was like, that's a massive game changer for me, because I had that, and I still get bouts of it now. It's still an ongoing process. I need to be like, no, actually, no, just go for that walk, because that's going to be really enjoyable. And I have to give myself permission sometimes to indulge, in inverted commas, in something that I want to do that is actually quite a healthy thing. Like just going and sitting and reading for an hour. I love doing that now, and I never had the clarity or the attention span to do that for years and years and years. So it's about being able to just enjoy little things. I think that's all there is.
I remember like it must be 12, 13 years ago. I read a book by I always struggle with how to pronounce his name. Thich Nhat Hanh. He's a sort of Buddhist, one of the sort of like a Buddhist leader. He's wrote sort of several books, and this one was The Art of Power, and it's about like, you know, kind of what true power is, like, you know, kind of inner power. He used exactly that sort of example about you know, how we do so many different things at once. Like, you know, I remember an example was like you sit at sort of breakfast time, and you know, the radio's on, you're having your cup of tea, you may be sort of having something to eat, and then there's the like a newspaper or something like that, and you're doing all those sort of things at once, or at least that information's coming into your brain, and it's like, how can you possibly enjoy all of those when you just not, you're spreading your concentration so thin. Just to, like, you know, when you have a cup of tea, have a cup of tea, and that is all that you do. Yeah.
And that mindfulness is so important for mental health, I think.
Yeah.
I read something recently which is very similar to that obviously the stereotype is that women are really good at multitasking and men aren't. And the concept of multitasking, like, it should be debunked, because you're not achieving more.
No.
You're actually just diluting across your focus and your energy across 4 things instead of doing one thing well and getting the most out of it. I went on a writing retreat to Scotland in October, and one of the things I wanted to do with that week away on my own was to exactly do that, to just relearn how to focus on one thing at a time. And one of the exercises I did, it's a Marina Abramovich, the performance artist. It's one of her exercises.
Yeah.
And I got a bag of broth mix, which is all like different types of like lentils and pulses.
Yeah.
And I poured it out, and then I spent like an hour just organising each different type of, like, you know, barley goes there, red lentils there, split peas there. And I just did that for an hour and with nothing else, no music on, tried not to think about anything else and just purely focus on the task. And I did that every day, and it was so good for my brain. I really felt the benefit.
Yeah. I mean, you know, those sort of things, I think, you know, it's, I find doing those, I have to really think and, you know, and sort of persuade myself to, you know, to do it, you know, and because I think, you know, we just sort of like the default that we've been used to for so many years is to do exactly the opposite of that. Like you said, you know, it's like you almost like sort of, you know, have these sort of stereotypes that you sort of latch onto and think, oh, well, yeah, it must be right. Yeah. I must be crap at multitasking, therefore I must try harder at it. Well, no, you don't need to. No, it's not that's not the signal that you're doing things right. Yeah.
And like, you know, looping back to the Jez from A Certain Ratio, it's like, just taking the time.
Yeah.
You don't need to rush things.
Yeah.
You can have a perfectly enjoyable, slow-paced morning and achieve all you think you need to do for the day in a couple of hours if you're focused and your mind is in the right place. I think, you know, so much productivity comes down to quality over quantity. And I think that's been proven. I think that, you know, the last couple of years with the pandemic, with people working from home, I think a lot of people and a lot of companies have realised, well, actually, people's productivity in certain cases, I mean, obviously, it, you know, it really does depend, but with some people, being able to work from home has been massively helpful.
Absolutely,
So I think, just giving people the option and realising that people are different and that, let people choose wherever possible.
Would you call yourself a risk taker?
I have a funny relationship with that kind of concept, and I don't think I am. But when I look at the things I do in my life, when other people comment on like, oh, you just quit your job and just did this other thing, like, or you just moved to the other end of the country and you didn't know anyone there, like, and it's just things that I don't perceive them to be risks, because some people would say, well, every time you get on a stage, that's a massive risk. You know, what if it goes wrong? What if people laugh at you? You know, I think I like routine, and I like my creature comforts. But I also get bored very quickly, and I always think the grass is greener. And I probably do. I probably do take some risks, but at the same time, I don't like conflict. I'm very conflict averse. I know that's a bit different to being risk averse, but I will avoid certain risks if there is a danger of there being like conflict or anger or aggression down that path. You know, that's kind of more of a scary thing to me than you know, doing something a bit wild and wacky. You know?
I'm with you on that, and I think those, you know, some of these sort of characteristics that we have, they sort of overlap. You know, I think that, you know, that sort of risk and conflict. I mean, you could say that, you know, if I you know, take a risk and do that, that's going to bring me into conflict with what this person wants, and I don't want that. So you kind of like constantly sort of weighing up these sort of things. That's why I think that I'm sort of a big believer in gut instinct. Although at the same time, I like to analyze things. Do you know what I mean? And I like to think, okay, well, I need to think about this, and this. But then there's an instinct telling me to perhaps go in a slightly different direction. Then after, I'm like, oh God. So I ended up doing nothing, you know.
Have you found, I mean, I've learned relatively recently that I am an overthinker. That's exactly what that is. It's overthinking.
Yeah.
Well, if this happens, then this is in like 20 years down the line, this might happen. And it's just like, well, does that mean you're not going to follow your instinct and just, go to the shop and buy that ice cream? And yeah, do you find that now that you're sober, has it changed your relationship with your instinct or how strong your instinct is?
Yeah, I think I trust it more. I definitely trust it more, and because I think I'm thinking with a much clearer head. That it's So I think there's a kind of trust thing there, and I haven't sort of explored why that is. It's a feeling that I get that my instinct is to be trusted more. For its kind of like accuracy of what it's telling me, if that makes sense. Yeah.
No, it's just something that I've definitely noticed is that my instinct has become a lot stronger.
Yeah.
And I've been more amenable to listening to it rather than just ignoring it because my brain knows better.
Yeah.
It's sometimes you listen to it.
I mean, there could be a sort of point that I'm getting older. My brain just sort of can't cope with like sort of detailed analysis.
Maybe that's what will happen. It's like, we're on this is happening with our brains, but our instinct's like on the up.
Yeah, it's on the up.
The young upstart now.
What else have I got to, what else can I use? Oh, you just got your instinct now.
Pulling you away from dangerous situations.
Which I don't know, if you think back, like kind of going back to, sort of when we sort of first sort of came onto the, kind of like evolved on the planet, that it was instinct, that we, those sort of, excuse me, sort of basic instincts that we kind of survived with, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm definitely one to intellectualize everything.
Yeah.
I tend to, if I'm learning something new or if I'm trying to better myself as a person, I'll understand the concept intellectually. This is what I need to change and this is how I change it. Got it. Okay, I'm doing it now. I'm doing it. And I'll pay lip service to it. And then 6 months down the line, I'll be like, oh, I actually am doing that thing now that I said I was doing 6 months ago.
Yeah.
That I just learned about and decided I was doing. But again, that's kind of connected to that idea of I think we often do things backwards. I think I think my life could be a lot simpler if I just trusted my instinct.
Trusted your instinct, yeah.
Trusted the universe in general, just being like, okay, stop worrying about it, stop stressing. Just
totally.
Do what you need to do.
Yeah,
I don't need to do all things.
I went for, no, you're right. I mean, I went for years where, it was like, I had to think things through and I don't know. I mean, maybe, I think, like the world, I mean, the world's so unpredictable and you can't predict what is going to happen, so that kind of uncertainty, I mean, it's kind of pointless almost, and I don't think our brains can kind of think so far ahead, certainly not what I was trying to do. It's like, no, it's pointless. It is pointless. And then you get this sort of conflict inside yourself that, there's one side of you that's trying to say, no, you need to kind of think ahead, well, consequences and all that. It's like, oh my God, just becomes sort of mind-blowing. And you reach a sort of stage, I think, so, well, I have done in the past, where it's like, come on, what's your heart telling you? Just go with that.
Yeah, and it can be scary to make changes, because we're all creatures of habit, aren't we? We all get into these routines, and sometimes, like I say, taking that risk, I guess, of just being like, hang on, this isn't serving me anymore. I need to make a change here. Yeah. And then, for me anyway, comes the whole horror of that thought process of like, oh gosh, well, if I make this change, it's going to impact this person in this way, and this will happen, and this will happen. But I think, in a way, that's actually quite good, because that's the logical part of your brain looking out for you and just saying, right, okay, well, let's think this through, rather than just like, I'm going to do this thing, like pure gut instinct. I think you're right, having a balance of the two. I think it's quite useful. What you said there, when you're kind of thinking about what other people will, or the impact on other people. I mean, that's your empathy, kind of right there. But as long as that doesn't dominate so much that
you can't kind of make decisions. I don't know. It's really complicated, the old brain, isn't it?
But that in itself is again a lesson I've learned quite recently, is the understanding. Like in recovery, there's a lot of talk about being right-sized, of understanding how big a role you actually play in other people's lives, because we're not the centre of anyone else's universe, despite what we might think.
Yeah.
Most people will just, your best friends, even your partner or whoever, you're not like contingent to their existence, and you're not responsible for their happiness and for whatever else in their life. And I think I certainly have so much guilt, about, I'm one of those people who just like lie awake at night thinking of something I said to somebody when I was drunk 23 years ago, and it would just play over and over in my head, and I'm just like, God, they probably forgot like the week after, like why am I like dwelling on this? Like,
I know what you mean.
I'm not as important as I think I am. Like, but that's a really liberating realization.
I think, I completely hear you with that. I mean, I when I was young, I mean, I still am. I mean, I kind of like my base sort of personality is of shyness and kind of like certainly more kind of introverted. I've learned to live with it, as I guess you do, with to an extent. There's still sort of like some situations I'd rather not be in, where I feel uncomfortable. I'd rather remove myself from those. But then, and there's certainly sort of times when I thought, oh, I can't do, what will they, ruled by what these other people will think of it. I remember like one of my earlier podcasts, and I will always remember this. It was Meredith Graves, and she said that, who told you that? And I think it's just brilliant. I just think it's just so good, because it's like the Trump question, isn't it? Who told you that? It's somebody that's no relevance to you whatsoever. Yeah.
I was driving and I listened to that episode.
Yeah.
And I was driving and she said that, and I was just literally going, "Oh my God, yes." And one of my friends who's a counsellor, sometimes when I talk to him, I was like, "Stop counselling me! Stop counselling me! Stop knowing things and seeing patterns that I'm not aware of." I said to him, I want to do this thing, but I just feel so like, I'm really not sure about it, and I feel really guilty about it. And he's like, whose guilt is it?
Yeah.
Like, and that idea as well of like, whose fear is it? Whose guilt is it? Whose blame is it?
Yeah.
Who thinks that?
Yeah.
Is it you? Like, who does that belong to? Because it's not yours.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important as well. Mm-hmm. Like, it's very similar to who told you that.
Yeah.
Like, who told you that about yourself?
Yeah.
Or like, where does this concept come from? Because, that's not your guilt to have.
Totally.
So,
I recently, or probably the last sort of 4 years or so, started to kind of trace back, trying to kind of understand, why, I sort of behaved in certain ways, or why certain things affected me more than I knew in my heart that they should do. So like, and I remember one thing, I sort of traced it right back to when I was probably sort of 8 or 9 years old, and a kind of like an interaction with my dad where he didn't believe, he basically believed somebody else over me. And I what I told him was absolutely right. This thing that, which is basically sort of telling, a friend of mine to fuck off. Yeah. I basically hadn't done, and he didn't believe me.
But that's a big deal when you're that age.
God, isn't it?
Like,
I didn't realise that it was going to be a big deal when I was like sort of 53 years old. It's just ridiculous.
Still thinking about it.
Yes. Oh dear. Anyway.
Yeah.
Carol, thanks so much. Thanks so much for your time. It's been really fascinating, honestly. Really, really good fun.
Thank you. Yeah. What a lovely conversation. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Indeed, not at all. All righty. Well, take care of yourself, and we'll. I'm sure. Oh, you're playing in London, aren't you? In about a month? Is it about? No, it's a few weeks, isn't it? Actually.
Yeah, it's the
Aces.
4th of Friday the 4th.
Friday the 4th. That's it. Yeah. Perfect. Brilliant. Well, I will see you there then.
Awesome.
Thanks for listening to the show, and I really hope that you enjoyed it and that you'll tune in for the next episode. In the meantime, it would be really awesome if you could rate and review the show, and also share it with any friends who you think might enjoy it.